Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 576 for the 27th of October 2019. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia. Yesterday in Sydney, Australia, it was hot, gusty winds, hot, strong, gusty winds, which were hot and gusty and windy. I don't know what was going on yesterday. It was crazy. Certainly doesn't help the bushfire or forest fire situation in this country at the moment. And indeed, in California, where I spend a lot of time right now, also they have forest fire problems. But regardless of that, coming up on this week's show, we continue the reports of Barbara O'Neill, the naturopath who was banned from providing healthcare services here in Australia just recently. And we read of her exploits in the Cook Islands, that little Pacific nation. And I would say if she's giving bad advice in Australia, there's no reason why that advice wouldn't be equally as bad anywhere she provides it around the world. We'll find out the latest from the Cook Islands coming up at the top of the show. Following that, it's guest reporter Rob Palmer, who does work for the Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia. He's also writing for the Skeptical Inquirer. He went to CSICon 2019 in Las Vegas just last weekend. Sorry I couldn't be there. Reports coming in say it was a good event. People learnt a lot of things, which is hardly surprising. Rob was kind enough to offer to do some interviews, so he's a special guest reporter this week and next week too on the Skeptic Zone. This is part one, and Rob will interview Seth Shostak, Dr. Seth Shostak, who is involved in SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Rob also talks to Paula from Argentina, Mentalist Mark Edward, and Natalia and Carlos from Brazil. Then to round off the show, part two of Fighting Words. The item by Tim Mendham is published in the pages of The Skeptic, all about the history of free speech. And thank you to those people who wrote in during the week at the Facebook page to comment on Tim's article, which was part one about free speech. And in the coming weeks, we have even more articles and items written and read by Tim Mendham. Well, that's enough from me at the moment. I'm going to run downstairs and have a slice of pizza. I'll tell you why. I've been watching a show on the special broadcasting network here in Australia. I think it's just called The Pizza Show. Boy, you watch a couple of those episodes, and what do you want to do? You want to run down the stairs and have a pizza. Well, I do that. I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Now, for the last few weeks, we've been bringing you the story of Naturopath. I wonder if I can say former Naturopath. I wonder. Barbara O'Neill, who was banned for life here in Australia from practicing healthcare. And in the past week, these articles have been brought to my attention from the Cook Islands. Now, the Cook Islands are a small group of islands in the Pacific Ocean, about a third of the way between New Zealand and the United States. From the Cook Islands News online at cookislandsnews.com, ban on healer who offered cancer cure to dying Cook Islands man. And it says in part, Australian claims to treat cancer with baking soda and advises against vaccinating children in visits to Rarotonga. A self-professed natural healer who runs regular workshops in Cook Islands has been permanently banned from providing health services or lectures after giving potentially fatal health advice to ill people. New South Wales Healthcare Complaints Commission found Barbara O'Neill told people their cancer was a fungus that could be cured with baking soda. rather than through conventional medical treatment. She also gave misleading and dangerous pregnancy and child-rearing advice through her seminars, website, online lectures, and consultations with clients. However, the Commission has no power to ban O'Neill from continuing her free workshops in the Cook Islands. She had visited twice, and she's booked to return in May next year. Close supporter Cheryl Masters, who helped O'Neill run workshops in Sinai Hall last month, revealed the death of a Cook Islands man who had been following O'Neill's advice in the hope of curing his cancer. The cancer had progressed to stage 4 when the man decided to follow O'Neill's recommended sodium bicarbonate treatment. The man, who resides in New Zealand, had returned to Rarotonga to undergo treatment with the help of their group. She said his last treatment, which involved applying a solution of baking soda, lemon juice and boiled water to the skin, then wrapping the patient in towels, was 3 months ago. As a result, Masters said, he had survived to spend 2 quality years with his family. Unfortunately, she said, he passed away a week ago. Masters confirmed O'Neill had advised on cancer remedies in Rarotonga, but had always emphasized these were a matter of choice. And as a side note, I'll say, well, as if that absolves her at all. We read on. And she never charged them anything when she came here. Masters said she had asked about the complaints. O'Neill had insisted she was falsely accused. We read on a bit later where it says, Masters said the event that O'Neill attended last month received good support from the community. Quote, this is a country that supports the use of Maori medicine and use of natural remedies like plants and trees to cure sicknesses. It's common here. It's common in the Pacific, end quote. But Kate Walker, whose mother Gloria died and was buried in the Nikau Cemetery following unsuccessful cancer treatment from notorious therapist Milan Breich, expressed alarm at O'Neill's remedies. Quote, it disturbs me greatly to hear a naturopath, and naturopath is in quotation marks, who has been permanently banned in Australia, is being promoted in the Cook Islands, end quote. And Jaywin Mackay, past president of the Cook Islands Breast Cancer Foundation, warned that cancer sufferers should be cautious about whom they take medical advice from. Quote, take the time to research people and what they say, end quote, she said. Quote, make sure there's actual scientific evidence to back up their claims. And remember, there's a reason why hospitals employ qualified cancer specialists. They know what they're talking about. Don't let yourself or loved ones buy into false hope, end quote. Now, there's more on that page. I'll link to that in the show notes. But a few days later, also in the Cook Islands news, came this story. Banned healer breaks silence to protest her innocence. The naturopath, whose Cook Islands disciples continue to practice her prohibited remedies, says she is the victim of a Nazi-style propaganda campaign. A self-professed healer learned she was to be banned from advising people on their health while she was visiting seminars across the Pacific in Rarotonga and Indonesia. Barbara and Michael O'Neill have written to the Cook Islands News, providing the response she penned to the Health Care Complaints Commission. She was running seminars here for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they say, which were also attended by members of the public. In her response to the Complaints Commission, penned in Indonesia after she flew out of Rarotonga, she agrees her health advice is not supported by, quote, mainstream medicine, end quote, but rejects the claims it is not evidence-based. Quote, I am writing this response from an overseas country that is classified as a developing country, end quote. O'Neill says she can treat cancer with baking soda and advises patients against giving their children the MMR vaccine, a vaccine that is the cornerstone of the Pacific region's battle against a measles outbreak. Quote, I am not mainstream. I have never claimed to be, end quote, she wrote. Quote, you have not produced one single instance of harm to any person ever from my advice. With regard to the vaccine issue, it is now government policy to promote vaccination, and the mainstream press are 100% on board with a propaganda campaign that would make Goebbels proud, end quote. Now, Godwin's law, or Godwin's rule of Hitler analogies, according to Wikipedia, is an internet adage asserting that, quote, as an online discussion grows longer, the probability of a comparison involving Nazis or Hitler approaches 1, end quote. That is, if an online discussion, regardless of topic or scope, sooner or later, someone will compare someone or something to Adolf Hitler or his deeds, the point at which effectively the discussion or thread often ends. We read on with the report where the Secretary of Health in the Cook Islands said she was concerned to learn O'Neill had been running health workshops in Rarotonga. Goes on to say the Ministry of Health has extended its use of the MMR vaccine to 6-month-old babies. The high uptake of childhood immunization here, it says, has been hailed as the reason there is no measles here. Now, New Zealand is following Cook Islands' lead in a bid to combat its potentially fatal measles outbreak. Michael O'Neill, this is Barbara O'Neill's husband, said on his wife's visit to the Cook Islands, she spoke of the, quote, 8 laws of health, end quote, that were core to her beliefs. Quote, she believes the body is designed to heal itself and will do so given the right conditions, end quote. And I'll just say as an aside, that's a red flag if I see something like 8 laws of health. I mean, really, that just comes straight out of the Quackery 101 handbook, doesn't it? I follow the 8 laws of health. Here they are, the 8 laws of health. And it ends by reminding us that the Commission here in Australia permanently banned O'Neill, concerned that she had told terminally ill people their cancer was a fungus and that could be cured with baking soda. She also gave dangerous pregnancy advice, the Commission found. Now, those 2 reports come from the Cook Islands News. Again, I'll link to both of those in this week's show notes. And I noticed at the bottom of the latest report there is one comment from our old friend Ken MacLeod, who writes, the first response of a crank is to label their critics Nazis. So I find it very interesting to read both these reports, and I must thank reporter Mandy Lee Noble, who is the Diet Skeptic on the Skeptic Zone, for alerting me to this. Well, we certainly hope that O'Neill can be banned in the Cook Islands, in Indonesia, in New Zealand, or anywhere else she tries to practice her interesting form of quackery.
Be Reasonable is the interview show from the Merseyside Skeptic Society, where each month I speak to someone about their fringe beliefs. Over the years I've spoken to psychics, UFO believers, moon landing deniers, flat earthers, hollow earthers, and all manner of unusual conspiracy theorists. But I've also talked to AIDS denialists, white supremacists, gay conversion therapists. I even interviewed Jim Humble, the inventor of Miracle Mineral Supplement, a form of industrial bleach that he and his followers use to treat cancer and HIV. This isn't a debate show, and my aim isn't to win an argument. But when we listen to how people promote and justify the ideas that we disagree with, even the dangerous ones, I think we become much more effective at countering those ideas. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, look for Be Reasonable on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else that podcasts live.
Hi, this is Rob Palmer, also known as the well-known Skeptic. I write for such publications as The Skeptical Inquirer, and I'm also involved with the Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia project, GSOW. In mid-October, I attended CSICon 2019 in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I gave a Sunday Papers presentation. I also found time to do some interviews for the Skeptic Zone. This week is part 1, where I chat to Seth Shostak about the search for alien life, Paula from Argentina, Mentalist Mark Edward, and Natalia and Carlos from Brazil. So I've run into Dr. Seth Shostak, who's one of the speakers who hasn't yet given his presentation, and I am really looking forward to it. And that's because it's going to deal with aliens and basically like looking for aliens and how should we do that. And I have friends who tell me, why are we wasting money on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence with radio waves when they're all around us, abducting people and mutilating cows?
Well, indeed. I'm Seth Shostak. I'm an astronomer. I'm actually the senior astronomer at the SETI Institute in California, and we are indeed looking for life in space. We're not looking for life in our airspace, however, and I will talk about some of my experiences in dealing with people who think that we do have such visitors.
Yes, many. So, to those people, what would you say is the best reason to not believe that we don't have those visitors?
Well, I think it's a bit unfair to ask people, well, prove that they're not here. You really have to prove that they are here if you maintain that, right, as a third of the population does. And so they offer, case studies, if you will, if you want to call them studies, Roswell being one of the most famous of these. So everybody's heard a little bit about how the aliens came to Earth and made a navigation error and crashed into the New Mexico desert, supposedly. But I don't see any very good evidence for that. And I think maybe the most telling evidence is the fact that tens of thousands of scientists around the world who would find this the most interesting story going aren't working on it.
Right. Have you seen the latest information that was supposedly leaked from the Navy regarding Navy pilots seeing aircraft and then that they couldn't identify and therefore giving new instructions to pilots that they can indeed report these things without embarrassment? Have you come across any of that?
Yeah, sure. That was a front-page story about a year and a half ago in the New York Times, below the fold, but nonetheless. However, one of the authors on that story, one of the reporters, happens to be somebody who's very tightly connected with the UFO community. So it wasn't that it was exactly an objective story, in my opinion. But in any case, the Navy videos that anybody can see, which show what was seen by these gun sight infrared cameras. I mean, surely there's something intriguing there, but there's nothing in those videos, I've looked at it, that can't be explained in very conventional ways. And so I don't see any compelling reason to think that this is the proof that everybody's been waiting for.
Yeah, I've actually seen some YouTube videos by Mick West, who spoke at CSICon last year. I don't believe he's this year. And his site is all about debunking conspiracies, and he took apart those gun sight videos. So, okay, so can you talk a little bit about SETI, where we're at with that?
Yeah, well, with SETI, I mean, the big problem with SETI, and in particular kind of a rebuttal to the people who say, why are we wasting money on that? Well, you're not wasting very much money, and none of it is taxpayer money, so it's not your money anyhow. People want to spend money on, feeding their pet parakeets. They're certainly entitled to do that, and indeed, the amount of money spent every day on parakeet feed greatly dwarfs the amount spent on SETI. So,
How much is spent?
Well, it's roughly $1 million a year for the whole world.
Wow.
So a year,
yeah,
not a day. So, maybe a little bit more. The Berkeley group has some money from a Russian billionaire who has taken an interest in this subject. They have money. Nobody else really has any other money. In fact, the total number of people in the world doing SETI is very, very small because of that.
Okay, and last question is, what other speakers, what other presentations, have you, the ones you've seen already that you really enjoyed or that you're still looking forward to for this weekend?
Well, I've enjoyed many of them, to be really honest. Several this morning, and of course the listener doesn't know what we talked about this morning, but there was a Joe Schwartz, who's well-known in the skeptics community, talked about baloney chemistry.
Fascinating.
Yeah, very interesting talk. Also, the talk by the attorney for the Center for Inquiry, talking about suing
Nick Little.
Yes, talking about suing some of the large pharmacy retailers about putting homeopathic products on their shelves. I mean, obviously that is a worthy thing to do, but it was very interesting to hear this story. And also a guy by the name of Nathan Lentz, who was talking about how we're so badly designed because we're the result of evolution, which is a bottom-up process. I don't know, how many people don't think that evolution isn't the way life has evolved or has been produced on Earth. It's certainly on the order of 40 or 50%, so it's a significant number. And, of course, these arguments might sway some of them, although I have the feeling that facts are not an issue.
Yeah, I have several people I work with, which I'm actually thinking of buying several copies of his book and giving one to each, but in fact, I might be wasting my money.
Well, it would be good for Mr. Lentz.
Yes, that's good. All right, thank you very much for your time.
You're quite welcome.
Well, I have found someone I think the Skeptic Zone listeners will be interested in hearing from. What's your name?
My name is Paula.
And you're from?
Argentina.
Wow. And how would the Skeptic Zone listeners know your voice?
Well, they have probably heard my promos on the Skeptic Zone. I have a Spanish language one. And there's also the Guerrilla Skeptics on Wikipedia promo that I do with Rob.
So how did you wind up doing the Spanish language one?
Because Richard asked me to, and I took very, very long to actually do it because I'm disorganized, but I finally ended up doing it. And you can hear not only my speaking voice there, but my singing voice, because I am also a tango and Argentine folkloric music singer. So Richard very kindly included that in the promo.
And for those of us who are unfortunately language challenged and only speak English, what did you say in that promo in Spanish?
Oh, let me remember. It says that I'm Paula, that I'm from Buenos Aires, that we also listen to the Skeptic Zone there, and that if the listeners are ever around Buenos Aires, I can show them around and take them to dance tango, maybe, if they want.
Very cool. And so how did you get involved with this whole movement? I heard something in it to do with Randy.
Well, yeah. Actually, I don't quite remember. I couldn't explain how I got to know about Randy. It's probably on YouTube, I assume, on the internet. And in 2014, I think, I learned that they were making a documentary about his life. And I admired him so much that I wrote to the producers and I said, I'm also a translator, I didn't mention that. I'm asked if I could provide the Spanish subtitling for the documentary so that it would be available for Spanish speakers. And they said,
what's the documentary? What's the documentary?
Oh, An Honest Liar, about James Randi's life. And they said yes, so I did. And after I finished the film, I felt sad that I would never get to meet Randy in person. And at TAM in 2015, they were going to be doing an homage to him, and decided to attend. I didn't know anybody at all in the movement. I just saw the thing, decided to come, just signed up, got a plane ticket, and just jumped in. And
you got to meet Randy.
Yes. Fortunately, a week before I got there, I wrote to Susan Gerbeck, who seemed very involved in all the plans, and she introduced me to a lot of people. And yes, I actually, the first thing that happened, I went to check into my room and it wasn't ready yet, so I sat at a couch on the lobby, and a minute later, Randy appeared and just sat next to me. So it's okay, this trip
is so cool.
Is all just everything I needed from this trip is done the first minute.
And you got to talk to him.
Yeah, he's so nice, always so fantastic.
That's fantastic. And you got to see him at this conference. He made a surprise appearance.
Yes. I saw him again in 2016 at CSICon. After that TAM, which was the last one, TAM is the amazing meeting, for those who don't know. And after that, I came to CSICon in 2016 and 2017. And yes, I saw him in 2016 and 17, I think. Yeah. So, yeah. No, he wasn't here in 2017.
Oh, 16.
Yeah. So, yes. And he's here this year. I'm very happy to know that he's here.
Great. And what are you most looking forward to at the conference besides maybe talking to Randy again?
Well, to be quite honest, for me, these conferences are about the people. I like attending the talks, but it's more about the friends that I make and all the interesting conversations that I have with very, very different people from very different backgrounds. I've made tons of friends, and that I friendships that I continue over the year. And yes, this is definitely what I most enjoy about coming here.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for all that. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you.
Okay, so I found yet another speaker, and this is someone who did a workshop on the first day, which was yesterday. Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Mark Edward.
And what was the workshop about?
The workshop was about skeptical activism. Susan Gerbic and I have been involved in several stings on psychics and people who call themselves mediums, and we're just starting to finally get some success with that. So we wanted to share our methods and how we went about setting it up so that anybody who's in a grassroots group who wants to do the same thing can do it and understand how it works.
Ah, fantastic. So since it was a workshop, does that mean it was interactive?
Yes.
How'd that go? Unfortunately, I wanted to attend yours, and I wasn't able
Well,
to.
we took a lot of questions because I've done other lectures on cold reading and hot reading, and where it was a little more interactive. But I think in the situation we were in yesterday, it was more the newsworthy things and how we are setting our sights on yet another sting, which is going to be, like to call it the mother of all stings. But we're holding out because we will not do it unless we have the conditions that we want, and we want a major news or somebody who's out there who's a media person or program that will give us more than 3.5 minutes and show both sides. We made it very clear.
So like with Thomas John when the New York Times covered it.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you have somebody who's a major media concern like that, it gets out. Number one, obviously, it gets out to the greatest amount of people, and number two, you have a bit of protection because they all have good lawyers, and you don't really. You can get away with a lot more than you would if you just went to a local newspaper or something like that.
So prior to the start of the conference, you and Susan went over to the Coral Science Academy, I understand it, to do a lecture for the school.
Yes, Susan has been involved with getting sponsorships for CSICon paid for through funding from the skeptical community, and trying to bring the teenage 8th grade kids over here to introduce them to CSICon and critical thinking. Even though they are from a science academy, they're pretty much critical thinkers already. We went over there and did a couple demonstrations. I did some magic for the kids, and Susan talked a little bit about, we showed them the difference between a cold and a hot read, which most people don't learn until they're in their adulthood. So the kids were very interested in this because they had never seen this explained. They had just seen television mediums and people who do this kind of pretend psychic thing.
Did you get a feel for, did any of them believe in it before you talked to them about it?
Yes, absolutely. Before we gave away the secrets, their mouths were hanging open. How did he know that? There's no way in the world he could know that. We love that line. We hear it all the time. There's no way in the world he could know that. And with kids that age, I was just using the simplest of cold reading generalities, and they couldn't believe it. In fact, again, this happens a lot, even with adults. Once we explained everything and we said, this is how we do it, one kid said, so you do read people's thoughts? And I had to stop and say, no, I don't read people's thoughts. And then I told him something about himself again. I said, you are a person who's really into sports and competition. And he was like, what? How did you know that? And I said, dude, you're wearing track shoes, you're in really good physical condition, you've got Adidas clothing on, what are the odds? And then he was like, oh, so we broke through on a level that I don't think kids that age are even aware of.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, and final question. What other presentation that's still to come are you most looking forward to?
I want to see Piff the Magic Dragon.
All right. I interviewed him for Skeptical Inquirer, and he's really an interesting character, so it should be very interesting.
Yeah, I like eccentric magicians, so I'm waiting.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mark.
Talk to you later.
I'm walking the halls of CSICon, and I've come across two people from São Paulo, Brazil, and one of them is giving a presentation on the Sunday papers. Carlos, can you first introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Carlos Orsi. I am from São Paulo, Brazil, and I am the editor of Questão de Ciência magazine. It's the only skeptical magazine in Portuguese language being published nowadays.
And Natalia?
I'm his boss. But actually, I'm Natalia Pasternak. I'm also from Brazil, and I run Question of Science Institute, which publishes the magazine, and it's the first institute for the promotion of skepticism and rational thinking in Brazil.
Okay. And what's your presentation going to be on?
We're going to talk about a national survey that the Institute conducted in Brazil this year about public perception of science, but really focused on public understanding and unwarranted beliefs in Brazil. So most of the public surveys conducted about perception of science, they focus on what people think of science, if they like it, if they think it's important, and we focus on how they perceive science, what they think science is all about. And we had some conflicting results with the other surveys that say that people are really interested in science and they really like it, and so the government should be funding it. And of course, we agree that the government should be funding it, but we are a little concerned about what people really know about science.
So they may be calling science something that you wouldn't call science.
Yes, when we talk about, for instance, medicine, they may include homeopathy or acupuncture as science. And that's what we want to test. That's what we conducted the survey. So.
Okay, very good. And you spoke last year, by the way. It was a similar topic, but not the same exactly?
No, last year I spoke about the situation of science in Brazil and about the alternative medicine that runs in our public healthcare system, paid for with taxpayers' money, and how we were about to launch the Institute. Because the Institute is very recent.
Okay.
And so we were about to launch it, and I gave a presentation of how I was going to tackle these themes in Brazil. So.
Very good. So, off topic of your presentation, what other presentation are you most looking forward to, both of you, seeing this weekend?
Oh, there's so many.
Yeah, you got me now. But I think I'm really looking forward to Trike Gumbel and the marketing and the Disney Imagineering guy is going to talk about how we bring people to team science, because I think it's something that we scientists and science communicators have never really paid much attention to, and it would be good to see another perspective of the situation.
All right. Thank you both very much. That was part one of my interviews from CSICon 2019. Join me here in the Skeptic Zone next week for part two.
Skepticon 2019, the Australian Skeptics National Convention, will be in Melbourne from the 6th to the 8th of December. We have an impressive speaker lineup, including The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, Dr. Steve Novella, Jay Novella, Cara Santa Maria, Bob Novella, and Evan Bernstein. Also, Susan Gerbeck from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia. And many other international and local guests, including Joe Thornley, the host of Zealot, a podcast about cults, and an author of a book by the same name. Skepticon includes a trivia night on Thursday the 5th of December to test your skeptical knowledge. For more information about the event, the speakers, and how to buy tickets, visit skepticon.org.au or follow the link in this week's show notes.
Hi, I'm Tim Mendham, Executive Officer of Australian Skeptics Inc. and editor of our magazine, The Skeptic. Today I'm going to continue with our story on free speech. As you know, free speech is often used by proponents of pseudoscience and the paranormal, so they can say anything they like, and if you try and point it out that they're not actually accurate, they get upset and they claim we're stopping their freedom of speech. This is from an article called Fighting Words, which appeared in The Skeptic June 2019, which is volume 39, number 2. In the first part of this, we looked at the history of free speech and the fact that the famous quote by Voltaire was never said by Voltaire. And so we have to be careful that our understanding of free speech is often full of holes. This time I'm looking at the 20th century and the stronger global movement for freedom of speech. Now, in the 20th century, as politics and nationhood developed, in the times between and after the two world wars, the era of international interference in nations' social programs began, first with the League of Nations, and then with that harbinger of the one world government, the United Nations, and its various offshoots. Freedom of expression is recognised as a human right under Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and recognised in international human rights law in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The UDHR was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on the 10th of December 1948 as Resolution 217. Of the then 58 members of the UN, 48 voted in favour, including Australia. None voted against it, 8 abstained and 2 just didn't vote at all. Article 19 states that, quote, everyone shall have the right to hold opinions without interference, and everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to seek, receive and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, either orally, in writing or in print, in the form of art or through any other media of his choice. In December 1966, the ICCPR, which is the legal one, was adopted as a multilateral treaty by the United Nations General Assembly. It initially came into force from March 1976, and as of August 2017, the Covenant has 172 parties and 6 more signatories without ratification. Australia signed in December 1972, and it came into force in November 1980. The Covenant commits its parties to respect the civil and political rights of individuals, including the rights to life, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, electoral rights, and rights to due process and a fair trial. However, the version of Article 19 in the ICCPR amends that from the UDHR by stating that the exercise of these rights carries, quote, special duties and responsibilities, and may therefore be subject to certain restrictions, when necessary, for respect of the rights or reputation of others, or for the protection of national security, or of public order, or of public health, or morals. Freedom of speech and expression, therefore, may not be recognised as being absolute, and common limitations or boundaries to freedom of speech relate to, as Wikipedia puts it, libel, slander, obscenity, pornography, sedition, incitement, fighting words, classified information, copyright violation, trade secrets, food labelling, non-disclosure agreements, the right to privacy, the right to be forgotten, public security, and perjury. Justifications for these limitations include the harm principle proposed by John Stuart Mill, as we discussed in Part 1. These limitations, certainly those pertaining to incitement and fighting words, do not seem to be an issue for noted social critic Noam Chomsky, who said in a 1992 documentary based on his book Manufacturing Consent that if you believe in freedom of speech, you believe in freedom of speech for views you don't like. Dictators such as Stalin and Hitler were in favour of freedom of speech for views they liked only. If you're in favour of freedom of speech, that means you're in favour of freedom of speech precisely for views you despise. It is hard to tell whether he was being critical of freedom of speech itself or those who would want to restrict it. These restrictions were discussed earlier this century by the European Commission for Democracy through Law, better known as the Venice Commission, as it meets there. The role of the Venice Commission is to provide legal advice to EU members, states, and in particular to help states wishing to bring their legal and institutional structures into line with European standards and international experience in the fields of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. In 2006, the EU's Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe passed Resolution 1510 on freedom of expression and respect for religious beliefs, particularly the question of whether and to what extent respect for religious beliefs should limit freedom of expression. It expressed the view that freedom of expression should not be further restricted to meet increasing sensitivities of certain religious groups, but underlined that hate speech against any religious group was incompatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. In 2016, the Venice Commission noted that a democracy should not fear debate, even on the most shocking or anti-democratic ideas. It is through open discussion that these ideas should be countered and the supremacy of democratic values be demonstrated. Persuasion through open public debate, as opposed to ban or repression, is the most democratic means of preserving fundamental values. But, as always seems to happen in debate on free speech since the days of John Stuart Mill, there was a caveat. The Venice Commission does not support absolute liberalism. While there is no doubt that in a democracy all ideas, even those shocking or disturbing, should in principle be protected, it is equally true that not all ideas deserve to be circulated. Since the exercise of freedom of expression carries duties and responsibilities, it is legitimate to expect from every member of a democratic society to avoid, as far as possible, expressions that express scorn or are gratuitously offensive to others and infringe their rights. So, what it comes down to is, yes, you have freedom of speech, but no, you can't necessarily use it. Yes, you have the right to your own ideas, but you can't necessarily express them. And if you express them, others have the right to criticise your ideas, if not actually vilify you. And most of all, and despite any regulation or legislation or philosophising or imperial decree, no one has to take you seriously, and that's their freedom. That's Fighting Words from The Skeptic, June 2019, Volume 39, Number 2.
The Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian Skeptics. Subscribe online to the world's second oldest skeptical magazine. Visit www.skeptics.com.au and click the publications link. You can also find there over 30 years of back issues free to download. The Skeptic, the magazine from Australian Skeptics. Thank you for listening to The Skeptic Zone. I'm going to be travelling to Melbourne very soon, where I hope to score a few interviews and do some promotional work for the upcoming Australian Skeptics National Convention. That's Skepticon 2019. Now you can see the details of that yourself at skepticon.org.au. And that's going to be held on the 6th to the 8th of December. So I hope to bring you some more news and reports about that convention coming up in next week's show. Thank you to those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone through Patreon or PayPal. And thank you to those new Patreons who have come on board just recently. It certainly helps the show. It's vital to the show. It's necessary to the show. It is pivotal to the show. Where's my thesaurus? Without your kind donations and regular support, there would be no Skeptic Zone. Imagine that. Imagine going through the week and having no Skeptic Zone to listen to. How would you get through your daily commute? So yes, thank you very much to those people indeed who support the Skeptic Zone. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter @Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Hello to those people who listen after the music. We're going to play the dice game. For those people new to this, I roll a die, either a 10-sided die, a D10, or a 6-sided, a D6. Well, today I'll roll both. So you have more chance if you use your psychic powers or dumb luck to predict what numbers are going to come up. So first I'll roll the D10. D10, okay. So you've got 1 in 10 shot of getting the number that's going to come up. Predict away, here it comes. 7. If I don't write all these down, I will not remember them. Where's the Skeptic Zone pen? There it is. So, 7. Now I'm going to roll the D6. So you have a 1 in 6 shot. Predict away. 6. All right. So that was the round 1. Here's round 2. D10 again. Okay, you've got a 1 in 10 shot of guessing this one. Predicting, I should say. 1. Now the D6. 1. How about that? Last round. Here we go. The D10. Predict away, and it's 6. Is there a pattern here? And the D10, last roll, is under the computer. Come back. Here it is. 6? Well, that's interesting. So the numbers were 7, then a 6, a 1 and a 1, and a 6 and a 6. In a couple of thousand years, when they unearth old copies of the Skeptic Zone podcast and listen, they'll think, what is this strange code?